What do you do when your beliefs are crumbling? What is deconstruction, and is it a legitimate path when you've lost faith in the sources you once trusted? Well, if you've ever asked any of those questions, then please check this out. For a younger generation who once called the church home but have since become disillusioned with Christianity, a ton have ended up on the path of deconstruction. Some have experienced hurt at the hands of Christians. Others have found that their questions go unanswered, left wondering whether anything that they were taught in church actually stands up to scrutiny. And others simply feel out of place, waking up to the disorienting reality that the religious subcultures in which they grew up have been captive to hidden agendas which seem to bear little to no resemblance to Jesus and his mission in the gospel. Everyone has a unique story, so while deconstruction has become simply a byword for apostasy in some circles or fodder for cheap insults on social media, the truth is there are a host of good reasons to rethink what you've been raised to believe. And I have a tremendous amount of compassion for those who walk that perilous path at risk of losing their sense of spiritual belonging. So what does the Christian story say about rethinking your religion? Should you deconstruct your faith? While I don't exactly speak as an insider to this experience, I have sought to be a trusted friend to those who are. And I recognize that deconstruction is a fraught process. No doubt at times you'll be tempted to take a wrecking ball to the whole religious enterprise, especially when the journey that you're on and the doubts that you express fall prey to misinterpretation. The truth is, after years of rethinking my own beliefs, sometimes paying a high cost for doing so, I am still persuaded that Jesus is a reliable bedrock upon which something healthy can be built. But even if you tend to doubt that right now, let me suggest a few things that should seem self-evidently reliable as helpful guides. Things I hope will serve as scaffolding for your own experience. Remembering that the end goal of deconstruction should be renovation, not a pile of rubble. First, don't go it alone. At a time when it can be easy to become alienated from your spiritual community, find safe people whom you can take the journey with. Now, not everyone who believes as you do will have the maturity to help you entertain your doubts. And not everyone who celebrates your doubts will have the wisdom to know when to challenge them in the pursuit of truth. Look for wise people, those who have the emotional intelligence not to force their own conclusions upon you, but who care about you enough to offer a compassionate ear, to ask probing questions, and to walk with you over time as you wrestle with a range of perspectives. You may actually be surprised to find just how many humble Christians have had to walk a similar path and are willing to help you do it. Second, search for a solid foundation. One of the defining features of deconstruction is an erosion of trust in the sources you once based your life upon, whether a sacred text, a religious leader, or even a spiritual tradition. As a result, you start to notice that some of the things you once believed now just don't make sense. And whilst this can be disorienting, for Christians, it shouldn't be surprising, since Jesus himself taught that religion can become hijacked by corrupt human agendas, with God's life-giving truth becoming obscured by empty human traditions. Of course, not all traditions are bankrupt. They can house and foster living wisdom, tested across time and preserved for our sake, but any story that journeys through the generations tends to accumulate cultural baggage, importing beliefs and behaviors that stand at odds with Jesus. From my experience, though, the best way to tear down what is false is to build up from what is true, which is why rather than starting with some wacky elements and abuses on the periphery of religious subcultures, it helps to get to the core of the Christian story. When you encounter Jesus' sublime teaching in the Gospels and take stock of his unique moral caliber, can you trust him, that he is who he claimed to be? And when you examine the evidence of Jesus' empty tomb and resurrection appearances, do you believe that he rose from the dead? Because on these two questions, everything hangs. For the confession that Jesus is Lord and that God raised Jesus from the dead is the bedrock of Christian truth upon which you can rebuild a solid faith. The bottom line, well, if you can trust Jesus as the cornerstone of your faith, then you have a blueprint for real Christianity that can expose what is false. Third, beware destructive habits. Like the ugly dynamics that can form in religious echo chambers, there is a dark philosophical underbelly to deconstruction. And the deconstruction community too can promote destructive habits. So beware the tendency to be reactionary, where in eschewing blind devotion to orthodoxy, you end up indiscriminately embracing heterodox thinkers. And be careful not to pose questions without taking time to engage meaningful answers. Especially watch out for making hasty generalizations, tarring all Christians with the brush of the religious subculture in which you were raised. Remember, deconstruction is only a step in the process of renovation. So consider your end game. Who do you want to be and what you want your relationships to be like? For that future vision might just give you the tools you need to avoid destructive habits and forge healthy intellectual virtues. And finally, fourth, engage quality materials. See, a common thread in the spate of deconstruction stories online, especially the high-profile cases, was that people bottled up doubts because it seemed that no one in their spiritual circles was credibly addressing their questions. But while there are some Christian subcultures that pay little attention to rigorous thinking, what is served up as popular Christianity in our consumeristic era, it tends to be a world away from the rich intellectual traditions that make up historic Christianity. There are entire fields of Christian academia that take your doubts and questions seriously. And where in wrestling with the data of Scripture and the world around us, Christian thinkers have dug deep wells in response, pastorally and philosophically. I have benefited immeasurably drinking from those wells, where even though I haven't always found concrete or satisfying answers to every single question, I have encountered a deep wisdom and vision of God that is more compelling than any other story or explanation out there. So if you are plagued by doubts, whether about the truth of Christianity or the goodness of God, if you have questions about the Bible or philosophy or science or ethics, then please search for credible voices to engage. We'll even put a link in the show notes to some Christian experts in their fields who are willing to personally counsel you through your doubts as you scrutinize the Christian story. For the best way to get at what is worth believing is engaging the best voices on all sides, both for and against, avoiding cheap caricatures and sensationalist popularizers in the pursuit of more substantive conversations. Ultimately, you are not alone. Christian history is punctuated with a long heritage of believers who have become disillusioned with elements of the faith they inherited, but who, in rethinking their religion, in going back to Jesus for themselves, have rediscovered someone worth trusting and a story worth believing. So go ahead and deconstruct, but do it wisely, taking the end game of renovation seriously. For the only time Jesus tore something corrupt down was to construct something more beautiful in its place. Truth invites questioning. Hey there, it's Dan here from Questioning Christianity. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, why don't you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube that you can go ahead and follow us on socials.